Hello and welcome to Women in Retail Talks. I'm Marie Albajes, the Senior Editor at Women in Retail Leadership Circle. Today I'm joined by Mary Rogers, the Director of Marketing Communications for Cuisinart, the full-service culinary resource with a wide array of products. In this episode, we're discussing how Mary's role in marketing has changed over the years, the company's e-commerce strategy during the pandemic, and more. Mary, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be speaking with you today.
So you've been with Cuisinart since August of '96, so 25 years, if my math is correct. I'm sure you've seen the company change a great deal over the decades. So start by telling me a little bit about what led you to Cuisinart and what has kept you there.
So yes, my anniversary is actually on August 11th. That'll be my 25th year. So if you had asked me when I started with the company, like if I had ever thought that I would be with an organization that long, I would have said no, because prior to that, I really had, been, I think the longest was like maybe 4 or 5 years at an organization. So what happened was I was working for another brand in the same space, which had been sold and then kind of dismantled. And so basically I was looking around and I had my eye on Cuisinart because I found the brand to be really intriguing. At that point, it was kind of a small, very upstart company and brand. And so I thought it was really exciting and appealing. And I just happened to, I didn't know this at the time, but they had been looking for somebody to head up marketing for the brand, but they hadn't really had much success. And I happened to just send my resume in, and that's how I got started there. And your other part of the question about what's kept me there, there's a couple of different things that have kept me there this long. The business has changed so dramatically. It's been exciting. It's exciting. It's, marketing has changed dramatically. Retail has changed dramatically. And to kind of grow with all of that. And the other thing about it too, is that though we're part of a very big private company, we're run on a brand level. So it still allows us to be very nimble and also allows me to really get a lot of things accomplished versus being kind of in a gigantic company where there's a lot of bureaucracy and it's really, sometimes all your energy is put into running things up the flagpole. And so I have a lot of anonymity. And so that's, those are two of the big reasons why I've continued with the company.
Yeah, it makes sense that they kept you there for that. So it sounds like you've been in marketing since the start in some capacity. How did you kind of grow the department into what it is today?
So, interestingly, when I started with the organization, it was myself and an assistant. And, 25 years ago, business and marketing was still focused on kind of the more traditional, channels. And the company had really not put any major resources or focus on real brand marketing. They were much more focused on product development. Product development is still a really big part of the organization's, roadmap, basically. That's what keeps the brand, fresh and innovative, and so, when I started with the company, they really didn't have a lot of experience in those channels. And so I basically started building that out. And as businesses changed, obviously now we're looking 25 years later, we have an e-com business and we have, lots of different channels, which we weren't actually using before. And then if you layer on all the marketing channels that exist now that did not exist, that's a whole nother, set of opportunities basically and challenges. And so, the thing is that you also have to kind of look ahead where you need to be going, because sometimes what happens with organizations is they'll be building out these things as they need them. And then it's like a lot of scrambling around. And so, we're trying to be more forward thinking in that area, because not only are we doing these things for ourselves, but we're also working the same channels with our retail partners. So, we're helping retailers keep their digital shelf clean and organized and, set up the way they need to be so that we have a good opportunity through our retail partners, but we're doing those things on both sides. So not only are we marketing our brand, but we're also working with our retail partners to market the brand to their end user also. So it's basically, you're doing marketing for more than one brand in a way. It's kind of interesting.
That must have been so challenging to continue trying to be forward thinking when the pandemic started and you had to take things day by day, I'm guessing. I mean, what was that like, that pivot to that kind of thinking?
I would say to you in the beginning, like the hardest thing is like the sheer shock of everything, right? And, one thing that really served us well is we've always been nimble because we kind of had this entrepreneurial spirit, and I kind of categorize our company, our division, as scrappy entrepreneurs. Like we're very scrappy, we're very resourceful, we're on top of our game. The other thing is that, we keep our eye on the business very closely. So I would say in the beginning of the pandemic, it was completely disrupted, like it is for everybody, has been for everybody. But the thing is, either you let that disruption disrupt you, or you find ways to make sure that you're keeping the team moving in the right direction, staying positive. There's a lot more energy put into that. I have a very collaborative team, and they do like to be together. So when everyone's sent home for over a year and a half, in the work from home environment, when you're not used to it, even for myself, I actually found that for myself, I was working nonstop, and I worried about that for my team too, because it's like, you're not taking breaks, you're not scheduling up, when you're in the office, it's completely different. You have those mini, interludes where you run into somebody in the hallway, or you go in to get a cup of coffee, or, you have more opportunities to commingle with people. And I also worried about like new team members who are not exposed to, executive management, because you're just so disjointed from all of that, I was actually glad that we went back to a hybrid schedule in July. I think it's good for the team. It's a little wonky because of the days that we go in are not, they're like 1 week we go on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. The next week we go on a Wednesday. So that's a little bit tough, because by the time you get settled at home, it's time to go back to the office, and so, I would say to you, one of the things that we were really good at is we got really good operationally, where, I've told people that in the past, we never had to worry about like, do we have ice cream makers, or do we have food processors? Do we have this, or do we have that? And, with the supply chain still being disrupted, we got really good at having to drill down to the point where it's like, we plan on marketing something. We are getting closer to the point at which we're going to kick it off. And, we just would have to be really working very closely with, our operations team, and also ourselves, understanding what retailers had goods, what retailers didn't have goods. And that became like a standard practice, where in the past we never had to really worry about it, because the company always had buffer stock, and we always, our key core items, we were always in stock on those, and we didn't even have to think about it. But it did disrupt a lot of our planning, where we ended up, planning on really short windows, because one of my pet peeves, I always say, is like, whenever I see a marketer send an email out and they have no inventory, or they send, they're posting on social and there's no inventory, I just think about the wasted resources that brought no benefit to the organization. And so that's one of my pet peeves. And so that's why we kind of pivoted in that direction. And we still are there because of different reasons now. The supply chain disruption now is related to, cost of raw materials, lack of raw materials, cost of containers. I'm sure all the things that you've heard about from other people in the industry. So we're still have those practices in place, which is, it's not a bad idea. It's just that it's time consuming, so if you're spending more time on operations, you're spending less time on strategic thinking and some of the high level things. I've told a few of my team members, sometimes you get so busy that your head's down and you're not like looking down the road basically. And so that's something you have to realize that about what you're doing, your day to day, what you're doing. If you're too tactical, you're not going to be thinking strategically. And that's something I try to look out for my team members too.
Yeah, I was hoping you could get into kind of the consumer trends over the past year and a half a little bit more. I read somewhere that you typically spend your mornings kind of reading up on what the trends are. And, with the pandemic, we suddenly had this growth of amateur cooks with all this time on their hands, suddenly interested in baking things like sourdough and banana bread. So talk a little bit more about how that was reflected in the product trends and in the demand.
Yeah, so I do make it a habit when I get up every day I have a lot of different places I'm like looking. So we also subscribe to a lot of other types of consumer research, not just syndicated data, but more cultural, trend oriented, that we stay on top of. A lot of our retailers also look to us and to see what we think the trends are to what we see happening, and right now there's a lot of categories you have to follow, right? So in our business, it's just not the e-com and the business and the economics. It's also consumer behavior, consumer trends, consumers moving, consumers going from, urban areas to possibly suburban areas. There's a lot going on. And then I also have a personal interest in a lot that's going on in the food area. So, there's such diverseness in food ingredients right now. Also a lot of the upstarts in some of the plant-based food, whether it's dairy or meat or chicken or fish, or, they're everything's, kind of going that way. And just like looking at what some of the trends are, not just now, but like several years from now, like where is that space going? And then how does it impact our business? And for example, one of the reasons I really look at some of what is going on in the manufactured, food business is that, knowing personally that conventional food and organic food and now plant-based food, you're seeing like it get more and more specific. All of the things that we make, that we develop, products that we develop, are aiding consumers and then possibly using those types of food ingredients with our products. And how do they cook differently? And, I know myself, conventional versus organic proteins, they cook completely, differently. And when you first start using those items, you kind of like, don't overcook it because it's the cell structure is completely different. The same thing with plant based foods is cell structure is different, so it cooks differently. So, I keep my eye on all of that. I also follow the typical all of our retail partners. What's going on in many, many, many categories, and then you have to kind of integrate that all in your head, not just as individual data points, and understand how that impacts your business and your brand and your customers and your consumers. So, and the reason I like to do it in the morning is I'm usually pretty fresh in the morning. I tend to do less of that like heavy thinking, or some of these huge projects that we're working on that are in the e-com space. I try to do all that in the morning, because not only are you fresh, but also that, the phrase like eat the frog, like, do the really hard stuff in the morning, because you won't get to it in the afternoon. And I do notice too, like when I work from home, the later, it's more apparent like later in the day that I tend to um, start to really like feel it basically, because you're putting in like longer, harder hours than when you're physically in the office. That's just for me, maybe other people feel differently about that. I talk to other people and they're like, I get up and I exercise and I do this and I do that. And like, I get up, I was up like 7:30 at my laptop, I start working. So, you know, I'm very disciplined about that, but I haven't been as disciplined with some of my yoga practice and meditation. And, I kind of let that, unfortunately, I kind of let that go. I was better at it when I would go to the office and I would go I go do yoga on Wednesday night, and it was a little more, for me, it had more structure than when I work from home. And then with the schedule being like, it's not like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I think I would do better with that. But anyway, that's my personal problem.
Yeah, I think the word structure, we can just throw that out the window for the last year and a half, but I'm the same way, so I get it. And speaking of, I wanted to kind of ask you how you've seen your leadership style evolve, pre-pandemic versus now, if it has changed at all, and what it's been like to lead while working from home.
So I would say to you that even before the pandemic, my style has changed pretty dramatically. I did go back to school and get my MBA not that long ago, just several years ago, actually. And so that was really the impetus of me evaluating my own leadership style and learning about what good leadership is, and also evaluating my strengths and weaknesses. And it's funny, I took a strategy course very recently with Scott Galloway, and one of the things that he was informing us is that you should always like look at yourself as like a case study, like what are your points of differentiation? And so that kind of reminded me about when I went back to school and got my MBA, because my styles changed very, very dramatically. Before that, I tended to be like, the thought process of like, I wanted things a certain way. And, it's hard, especially when you don't realize these things about yourself, that you're building a team for them to contribute. And you have to give them the space, but also support and resources to accomplish the things that are on your roadmap, right? So for me now, I'm very much believe in the people that I hire, that they own their business, their space, their responsibilities. I'm not a micromanager. I don't believe in micromanagement. Micromanagement to me is a sign of insecurity. And I think that what happens is when people micromanage, they basically crush the soul of the team member, because, and then they also get, if they know that you're going to jump on it every time, they are like halfway down the road, then they're going to dial back. Basically, that's my opinion. So I'm not a micromanager. I'm there. I'm very involved in all of the really big picture projects. I'm there and I get my hands dirty, when it comes to some of these big projects. We're working on a complete data cleanse right now of our web property, and there's 6 of us involved in literally looking at every single data point on the website. And I'm in there with everybody. Some people will say, well, that's not a good use of your time. Well, it's not about good use of my time. It's about showing my team that I'm there in the pile with them, right? I'm not just saying, hey, here's this gigantic project and I'm too good to help you with it. Like, that's not how I operate. I'm there in the weeds when I need to be, but it's also because I want them to be successful, but I'm not going to let them do it without my support and my involvement. So when it comes to all the really big picture stuff, I'm in there with the whole team. I'm in all the meetings. I'm, giving my guidance, but I'm not telling them how to do every single, thing that they do. I want them to think they have freedom too, freedom of thought, freedom to bring good ideas to the table, because if they don't have that, what's in it for them, career wise, if they're not getting opportunities to be involved in really critical, business critical projects, what's going to keep them engaged?
Right. As you were evaluating how your leadership style has changed, did you think about any specific challenges that you face, particularly being a woman working through this company and through a company whose products traditionally were marketed toward women, right, and toward being in the household? So I'm curious if you have any specific challenges associated with just being a woman in this industry.
Yes, there's a lot of challenges. I think one of the biggest things is that even though, women are still make up a very large portion of the purchase decision making in these product categories, it's become less so over time. But the thing is, these companies are still heavily run by men. And that hasn't served me well, to be completely honest with you. I think the other thing is that it's a lot different too, because a lot of times some of the people in upper management have been with some of these organizations a very long time, and their wives don't have careers like traditional careers or working mom careers, or so there's a completely different perspective. Those women are the CEOs of the household. And so you now have all of these responsibilities that working women also are handling that they don't have to think about. They don't have to think about it. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that have a more of a a split partnership, or they split things up. In my household, my husband and I, we don't have children, but we my husband does this and I do that. But then we also do certain things together, so I would think that one of the things that does concern me right now, especially during the pandemic, is the sheer number of women who have decided that, it's not worth it anymore. And, that bothers me, as a woman. I think the other thing is that women in general, in my personal opinion, are not braggers. Like, I am not a good bragger. And I see how that hasn't served me. Like, I'm really great at marketing my brand and marketing my products, but I'm not that good at bragging about me, about all of my accomplishments, and so that also hasn't served me well. I think the other thing too is that sometimes when you're in these private companies, they don't have well-developed career pathing. And that's also a complete disadvantage for women, I believe, and any employee in general. So, that's some of the things I've struggled with. I've also have had to be completely responsible for my own professional and personal development. And so I for my own team, I make sure that that's a priority, because that's something that I see that, the way the world is changing so dramatically, that needs to be a priority. And so for myself, for every one of the team members, I expect them to have a professional goal every year. It's part of the, we work on the ADP review process. So it has to be one of their goals. Like, I expect you, I mean, I don't, we work together deciding what it should be. And then I make sure we have the resources to do that, or whether it's taking digital marketing classes, or some of my team members do a lot of presenting to retailers, and some of them are not as comfortable doing that. So, make those things available to them. So I think that's super important too. You have to be responsible. Even if the company did have a more formalized system there, I think that I would still make it a requirement, because there's so many so many areas that you have to be knowledgeable about in marketing. Like if you just start saying, okay, social media, e-commerce, direct to consumer, there's so there's so many, and every day a new one crops up, right? So and then how do you integrate that into your overall marketing planning, basically?
I love that about having your team make sure they have those professional goals set. And in terms of bragging, I mean, I totally understand. And there are two things that I noticed about you that I think you should brag about. One is that I believe you're still learning Italian, which is really cool. And the other that I noticed was your induction into Le Dames Escoffier International, that membership organization that works to advance and support women in the food, beverage, and hospitality industry, which is really cool. And I wanted to ask you if we could finish off with this question, and perhaps these 2 points of bragging will fall into this category, but what are you kind of most looking forward to professionally and personally for the rest of the year?
Well, you did mention Italian. So I've been studying Italian for, I think it's like 9 years now. So um, I love the language. Number one, it's very complicated. I don't care what anybody says to you. I think English is so much easier. Some of the Romance languages, there's so many ways to use pronouns. It's you can't even imagine. So I'm definitely more advanced now. I took a hiatus this summer with my studies because my husband had knee surgery, and so something had to go, and that happened to be it. But I will be back to it in September. So I was looking forward to a trip to Italy, but that definitely is not happening this summer. But I hope to do that again soon, hopefully as things settle down, that people will be able to do more traveling. I'm very inspired by traveling myself. I happen to have a big focus on Italy. I love Italy, but I also love it because I get to go practice my language skills in person. And I've also been lucky enough to study Italian in Italy. So that was something after I got my MBA, that was my present to myself. I went to Siena and I studied at Italian school in the Dante Alighieri Italian school in Siena for 2 weeks. And it was very intensive, but it was definitely felt like I went back to college. So my earlier days. But some of the other things I'm looking forward to the back half of this year are hoping that everyone will be able to spend more time with their friends and family. People are really missing holiday celebrations, basically, and I'm really hopeful that that'll happen again, happen this year for myself. I happen to host Thanksgiving, and that's we bring both families together during that time, and I'm hoping to do it again. It's something I really miss. I actually got to see my family this weekend because it was my niece Samantha's birthday, and so that was really nice on Saturday. But I'm hoping to be able to spend more time with friends and family that we haven't been able to be with over the last year and a half, basically. So, and also I love to cook, so I have to throw that out there. You mentioned some of the culinary things, and we have a big focus as a company on things that we're doing with the James Beard Foundation and also the Jacques Pepin Foundation. And I also have a passion for that. So one of my pandemic skills that I developed was making homemade pasta. It's actually really easy to do. But when everybody else was making sourdough bread, and I did make banana bread once, I will admit that. I did make a lot of things like focaccia and pizza, and I did elevate my pasta making skills. I'm actually really good at it now, and it actually tastes really good. So I kind of weave that Italian in anywhere I can. I'm actually Irish and Italian, which is kind of interesting. My dad's all Irish. My mom is half Irish and half Italian. And my husband's family, the mom is Italian and his dad was like Scottish and English. So kind of have a good mix, but that's kind of the underlying part of it.
Well, I hope you are able to serve pasta to all your family during the holiday season. Mary, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Women in Retail Talks.
Thank you for having me. It was really nice.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at womeninretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Women in Retail Talks is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few minutes to rate and review this podcast. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Women in Retail Talks.